So we're going to go to opening comments from each candidate. We're going to give each of you 5 minutes. As I was just testing out, I will be holding up this. If it's hard to see, you will get the old school post-it note of the 30 seconds and you will be cut off at the 5-minute mark. Just to be clear on that, we're going to go alphabetically. So we'll be starting off with Roseanne. We'll go to Reginald Bellerose, Jody Calahoo Stonehouse, then Lee Crowchild, Alvin Fiddler, Kevin Hart, and Cathy Martin, all 7 of the national chief candidates. We did put a call out for questions, and as we haven't received any, we're going to open the floor to questions. There's 2 ways that you can get questions to be asked. You can bring them up yourself just by raising your hand virtually. Hopefully you're well versed with that, and raising your hand virtually. We'll make note, and some BCAFN staff will help me keep track of as they go up. You can ask a question to an individual candidate, or you can ask a question to all candidates. Do note, for any response for any candidate, whether it is an individual question or is a question that goes to all candidates, you are going to have a 2-minute time limit for your response. And if it's a question that goes to all candidates, I have my handy dandy old school highlighter piece of paper where I'm going to keep track of a rotation of those questions. So never to give anybody the advantage of first or last answer, that we're going to be rotating that through. And then, of course, when we're done, we're going to take as many questions as we can and have hopefully a robust conversation all the way up to and through ending today at noon. So again, we're going to start off with opening comments from each of the candidates for 5 minutes each. Then we're going to open the floor to questions. With the question, we ask that it truly be a question. I understand there's a lot going on. We can get heated in those questions. We're looking less for statements, more for questions. Of course, we always welcome context. Those questions can be to individuals or to all candidates. As I said, it will be rotating. Any response will be 2 minutes, and I will be timing it all. With that, we can take the agenda down, please. And I'm just going to get set up and invite you, Roseanne Archibald, to turn on your camera if you have stable internet, because just as soon as, there we go. So when you're ready, I'm going to push the timer and you will have 5 minutes. Like I said, it'll be the old school 30-second, but you can also watch the timer on my end. So thank you so much for joining us. And when you're ready, we welcome your opening comments.
Rochelle, I just have a quick question before I start. I wanted to share my pamphlet, my draft pamphlet document on the screen. Will I be able to do that? Because I'd like to take a couple of minutes to go through that as a part of my 5 minutes.
You have 5 minutes. This is a virtual realm. I don't see if anybody else would like to do that. We invite you to do that as well. I do believe we need to enable screen sharing. So for any other candidate, fortunately, this came up at the beginning. So if there's anything that you'd like to share, you got a couple of minutes to figure that out. And when you start, Roseanne, I'll press the timer and you have 5 minutes.
All right, thank you so much. I am going to share the screen, but first of all, I just want to say miigwech for having me here today. Wachi, everybody. Roseanne Archibald. First of all, I want to acknowledge the Creator, the world around us, and our place within it. I am coming to you from my own home territory of Dagudagumo Nation, and I acknowledge all of you on the various traditional territories that you're on right now. I, first of all, want to say miigwech Rochelle for facilitating this. Miigwech, thank you, Gwen Point, for that lovely opening prayer. I do want to acknowledge BCAFN Regional Chief Terry TG, who I've had the great honor of sitting at the AFN executive table with for 3 years. I also want to acknowledge Kilselem, who is one of my nominators, and Chief Maureen Luggie, who also is one of my 15 nominators. nationally. I have been blessed to have lived on the traditional territories of Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam for many years. And I do also want to acknowledge the comments around the 215 little ones that were found in Kamloops. We're certainly all affected by this nationally, but I will take this time just to go through my pamphlet because I know I'm limited with time. So this is still a work in progress, but I do want to just tell you that when I thought about running for national chief, I wanted people to understand that this came from a place of ceremony, that I did pray with my pipes and undertook many ceremonies that I've learned from my mother and other medicine people to make sure that I was grounded in spirit and that I was being called spiritually to do this work. And so you can see on the left there, my leadership approach is I have over 31 years of proven leadership, and it is grounded in the 7 sacred teachings. So first of all, I hold in my heart a deep and abiding love and care for all people. At the same time, I have the courage to stand up and defend our rights. And so as national chief, I will respect the autonomy of our First Nation governments, ultimately having community-driven solutions that feed into regional and treaty approaches that form a national response. I will look to sectors of our society to guide me, including the wisdom of the elders, the honesty of our young people, the truth of our grandmothers and matriarchs, and the bravery of our two-spirited LGBTQIA+ peoples. Most of all, I'll serve with humility, knowing that my leadership is a sacred responsibility and duty. And I am holding, I always have a positive vision of the future for our people. And you can see my vision statement there is to hold in my heart and mind happy, healthy children who are surrounded by the love and care of their immediate and extended families, living in safe, vibrant communities that are grounded in well-being, culture, and language. Now, I just want to focus on my 7 priorities. You can look to the left there and read some of my selected achievements. I have mentioned many times that I am a 3rd-generation chief, and I've been a chief at all levels of our political system, twice in my own community, twice as a deputy grand chief, once as a grand chief of my tribal area, and then of course I just recently finished my Ontario regional chief position. So in terms of my priorities, the first one that I have is around the AFN organization itself. And I really want to look at separating, delineating these administrative versus political functions of the AFN. We do have the Chiefs Committee on Charter Renewal that's doing good work. And I believe that we need to keep moving forward on a non-political board of directors. And how do we do that? How do we balance that? Well, we revitalize the Confederacy of Nations. And so simultaneously, I think it's important to recognize the contribution of regional chiefs. And one of the things I would do is create a national leadership council. This is a concept that you're familiar with in BC, and we're familiar with it in Ontario. It is something that I was able to establish and finalize as a regional chief. Before that, we had a board of directors and a leadership council that were very intertwined, and we made that separation. They used to be called the Political Confederacy, but now they are the Ontario Leadership Council. And so I think what we have to recognize is that that there are good things happening at the AFN. There are things that the AFN is doing well, but there are deficiencies that have been identified by chiefs, and we have to fix those. So that's one of my first priorities. The second one is respecting First Nation and treaty organizations across Turtle Island by creating a national consensus-based agenda for action. And that includes principles of peacemaking.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Thank you so very much, Roseanne. Yeah,
Okay.
I know. 5 minutes is
a lot of
not
time.
a lot. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll stop sharing. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Well, you can take a breath, take a sip of coffee. Thank you. And any of the questions around the brochures, I will leave that up to the BCAFN staff to respond to. There has been some requests there, and I kindly ask BCAFN staff to respond. I'm going to go now to Reginald Bellerose. Reginald, the timer, as you saw.
Yeah, just bring greetings from the Muscogin First Nation, Treaty 4 territory. I want to acknowledge the prayer, the song, so it's beautiful. Acknowledge the territories that you are all in, and also to the regional chief, you and your team, acknowledge you. Been elected chief in Muskowgon First Nation now for 17 years. Want to come forward as a what I believe is a great option for the chiefs to consider as a national chief. Band level experience in all assets, all facets, and been able to bring that success to Muskowgon, to Treaty 4, to Saskatchewan region, nationally on some key files. I've been instrumental in supporting those along the way. Some of my key priorities are rights and jurisdiction, the treaty and inherent rights. Collectively, I believe we have to take a stand. We have to write our own laws. We have to envision that our way of life needs to be protected. There's no government that can come in and infringe upon our way of life, whether that be fishing, hunting, trapping, gathering, all those important core values. We need to stand strong. The jurisdictional encroachment that the Crown is giving to the provinces, that's where we need to take a stand. You got to stop transferring these rights, authorities, and resources to the province without our input, without our knowledge, and without our consent. Economic sovereignty, I wanted to say that one of our areas that we really need to focus on is to ensure there's leverage to access capital and investment. We have great concepts, great plans, but we're lacking that capital to help us advance our community plans, our business plans, our visions. We need to support existing community businesses to ensure that there's enough working capital to expand and grow. The small businessmen and women, they're limited by the working capital that they have. I want to support and encourage participation in solar, in agriculture, and e-commerce, all of those important areas. Health and wellness is another one that I really want to stress upon. Our own health paradigms designed and controlled by First Nations people for our own people, led by our elders, led by our knowledge keepers that can help us get well, not treated, but to get well. What we got to do is we got to push that our health plans need to be funded, not because of therapy or not because of Western, because of what we want, whether it's land-based, whether it's culture-based, on the water, however we feel, that's where we need to focus. Recognition and healing through residential schools. What's happened in Kamloops, Muskowgon still has the school up. We have also unmarked graves. We want to bring forward a proposal to the chiefs for special designation for these sites. There's about 170, 180 sites across the country. They need special designation, not Canadian Heritage Site, but a special designation that recognizes that we are the first people of this land. We are the owners of this land. And this is what the federal colonial policy did to us. There needs to be interim funding, long-term funding. We need to, that direct action would be the Chiefs of Canada commission a study, not the government of Canada, but the Chiefs of Canada commission a study to do this, gather the findings, whether we need to go legally, however we want to approach that. But I want to bring forward the First Nations who have these sites on their lands. Gaming is very important. We want to focus on revenue share for First Nations across the country. We also want to look at C15. The framework needs to be led and approved by the chiefs. It's very important that it has to be First Nation led. We don't need to follow. Ultimately, the Chiefs and Assembly will guide the process. They will through resolution. So I wanted to present myself to the BC Chiefs as a candidate, and I want to thank you for time. We have the consideration is now in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you so very much to Reginald Bellerose. We're now going to go over to Jody Calahoo Stonehouse and just Jody, when you're ready.
Excellent. Tansei, Haichka, Gwendolyn, thank you. Haichka, Nanaskaman for opening us up with that beautiful song and that greeting and that welcome. It was very beautiful. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Jody Calahoo Stonehouse. I'm from the Michelle First Nation in Alberta and Treaty 6 territory. And my Chopon, Johnny Calahoo, was the first president of the Indian Association of Alberta. And so as a young girl, I got to grow up attending assembly meetings, listening to politics. And I also know what happens when there's a resource extraction on your land and when the Indians are starved out for that resource. And of course, we've seen the Canadian agenda around resource extraction. And that's just not my First Nation, but all First Nations across Canada face many of the same issues. So I decided to run for the national chief position when I was 15 years old. I had a dream and I've been working towards it ever since. In 2008, I had the privilege and the honor to come study under Professor John Burroughs at the University of Victoria. And part of my work there was to come spend time studying the house system, as well as spending time in Sta'alis and looking at the ways in which they were changing their child welfare engagement. And my hands are raised to you in BC because you are doing things very differently than other First Nations across the country. And I think what's really important at the national level that we need to do now, because as we've seen through COVID, through the pandemic, all of the harms, all of the collective trauma has risen to the surface in our nations. And we must deal with this together. We must have solidarity in our collective healing. And so part of the beauty and the strength that the BC First Nations has, because of course, colonization made its way here and it came a little later, the impact. And the Indian residential schools, of course, were more condensed and intense. Alberta had more than any other province. And so, of course, we're seeing the realities. There's more incarcerations, more children in care. And here in British Columbia, there's this beautiful strength in your hereditary systems, in your governing systems, in the way the totems, the responsibilities and the obligations, the ancestors that have been passed down to the children, that knowledge, it's still really intact. And so how can we at the national level draw on strengths from the treaty numbered treaties from 1 to 11, the pre-Confederate, and then the modern day, and then the inherent rights? What are the ways that we can support and lift our governance, our negotiations? Because we all see sovereignty differently and we all express sovereignty differently. Here in British Columbia, you're doing extraordinary things with the province. Your First Nations Health Authority, you are serving your people well. You are making movement to change lives. And so what I want to bring to the national level is systems. I want to change the way that we're doing things slightly so that there is accountability and transparency. What are the resolutions that have been made? What has been done? What community, which nation nominated for this? And where are the alignments with other nations? For example, the fisheries DFO. Can we utilize some of the tools and strengths and resources on the East Coast with the West Coast? How do we merge that work so that we are supporting each other's work? These are very big work against the Canadian state, and we need each other, particularly as climate change impacts our harvesting practices, because it's impacting our traditional way of engaging with each other. So the work of the national office now is to not bring us together in unity, but to bring us together in solidarity so that the work we do lifts one another. And so in that tracking method in real time, a chief can go online and look for a resolution that was made, what decision was made, who did what are the next steps, was funding allocated, and did it change the lives on the ground in our communities? We need to see the results. We need to know that the funding that is being applied to our nations is making a difference. And where it's making a difference, let's share those ideas with each other so that all of our nations can thrive. We have much work to do, chiefs. We need to change the way we're doing things. If COVID has taught us anything, we are adaptable. We are doing Zoom meetings today. So we need to change the way we're doing things at the national level. And I look forward to bringing the insights and knowledge and wisdom I've accrued across the country, being with elders, ceremonies, being on the land. We're a beautiful people. We are a strong people, and we need one another for the next 7 generations. So hi, Nanaskaman, Hachka. I appreciate the time with each of you this morning.
Thank you so very much, Jody Calahoo Stonehouse. We're going to now go to Lee Crowchild. Lee, when you're ready, I will start the timer as I have.
I raise my hands in respect to all the chiefs that are sitting here and all the thought leaders. I lived in BC for 10 years. I got a degree from UBC and also went to film school there. All of that aside, I did visit with lots of communities on the West Coast and the interior. And so what I learned was the importance of real kinship. You know, right now, as we talk forward, we talk about our points of separation and not really our points of celebration about who we are. Sadly, we kind of define ourselves by non-First Nations dialogue, definitions, and perspectives. What I say is this is a time as for AFN and for all the chiefs to set a new compass direction. We need to go in a direction that is true to our traditional, our cultural, and our land roots, that is steeped in the grassroots of our communities. The 215 taught us that here's the evidence now. This is an oral tradition we but nobody believed us until we actually showed you the hard evidence. We gave our lives so you can have this evidence to do what you need to do next. And that's where we're challenged. And that's where we're going to succeed is taking those forward. Because we have to stop being harvested as a resource. You know, everything that happens, they harvest us, they harvest our thinking, they harvest our bodies, everything there. We need to change that. As I move forward, I thought, well, any ideas that are going to come forward, they have to have the parameters or the points of my own belief, my core belief. So there are 4 that came over. Any decisions made had to have environment accountability. Anything had to have economic parity. There had to be a social impact. First and foremost, spiritual sustainability. Now, you know, all across Canada, we all have our different needs, our different values, our different wants. You know, so one size fits all for all of Canada just isn't going to work. It's never worked. We need to take a look and make AFN relevant again. We need it so it accounts for the values for BC, and even in BC, the interior, the coast, up in the north, it has to be relevant to those, as well as those that are living in the treaty areas from the mountains, Rocky Mountains east, all the way to the east coast. You know, we're pretty diverse. So I like to think that in terms of economic development, like here in Alberta, whether you like the Premier of Alberta or not, he did something that was really quite remarkable. He gave $1 billion, he set aside $1 billion for economic development. And I say, you know, each province should do the same. BC should be 2 million because they're such a large, vast country. Same with Ontario. You know, I think $24 billion from the provinces to give to First Nations so they can develop their own economic plans is kind of a step in the right direction. Is it doable? I don't know, but I like to think it is. I think that in terms of jobs, we all want to talk about jobs, we all want to talk about housing. Those are the kind of the main things that our people always ask for. I need a house to live, all right? The way CMHC has put it, we can't meet those needs because we're using a system that has failed us all along. I need job. You know, you're a good chief, but I need a job. I'm not working. Well, let's build these homes in the manner that we think is possible. You'll have a job then. Okay, well, what about our health? What about these? We have a system of validation that is common to everybody, and that's our traditional knowledge. And that is what we use with the medicine people. You talk to them, and it has to go in terms with what science is dictating, what Health Canada dictates to us. I'm running short on time, so I'm going to wrap this up here. As people, we are connectors. All of us, we're connectors. That is the value that we all possess. And I think Dr. Point would kind of agree with that because I've known her from UBC, you know, and the words she spoke. So thank you very much. CS Gus, and I'm honored.
Thank you so very much. That's Lee Crowchild. Before you start, Alvin Fiddler, we're just going to do a very quick tech check. So Alvin, you want to put on your camera, put on your microphone just before make sure we can hear you well before we get started officially, as we didn't have a chance to do that with you. So Alvin Fiddler.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can hear you and we can see you. Great. So
All
I
right.
just wanted to make sure we could hear you and see you. And when you start next, I'm going to start the timer. I don't know if you heard, it's 5 minutes for the opening remarks. I will have my timer and give you the good old fashioned 30-second mark.
All right. Thank
when
you.
You're ready.
Yeah, miigwech. Yeah, good afternoon, Chiefs. Miigwech for the opening prayer and the song. Dr. Gwendolyn Point. So I want to acknowledge you for opening us up in a good way. Thank you so much for this opportunity. So I just want to acknowledge the leadership in BC, the elected chiefs, the hereditary chiefs, your elders and women, youth, our veterans, and all the Indian resident school survivors. So I just want to acknowledge all of you and your nations. I also want to acknowledge my fellow candidates that are on this call. I'm starting to feel like they're part of my family. I see them almost every day, so I just want to say hello to all of them. Also, just to acknowledge your territories, and I'm from Musqueam First Nation Treaty 9 territory, so I bring greetings from my family and my community to you all. I also just want to, I said it late last night, well, kind of late, watching the hockey game and Carey Price and just how brilliant he's been playing. So I want to acknowledge his family and his community, and just we need this, especially during these tough times. And I'm not much of a Habs fan, I must admit. I'm kind of a Leafs fan, but I want to just acknowledge his talent and his gifts that he's sharing with all of us. I also want to acknowledge 3 chiefs that were part of my nomination process from BC. Thank you so much, Chief Maureen Chapman, and Chief Nicole Rempel, and Chief Harold Layton. Thank you so much, miigwech, for believing in me. I also just want to acknowledge the whole BC region, the strong leadership that you've shown over the years, and the important cases that you've advanced in so many ways. And you know, whether it's a Sparrow case, the Galmac, the Haida, and the list just goes on and on. You are leaders, and we are all benefiting from the work that you have done. So thank you so much. And there's so much there that we can build upon. So miigwech, I can't say enough about going to the AFN meetings and hearing about all these important issues and cases that you won on our behalf. I also just want to acknowledge what we heard in Kamloops a few weeks ago, and how devastating and how heartbreaking it was for all of us. You know, my oldest sister, Sarah Jane, was one of those survivors and went to residential school, but didn't really come home, and ended up in BC, and that's where she passed away and is buried in Quesnel, BC. So I just want to acknowledge all our survivors, and I'm committed to the work moving forward, that we need to search all these sites and find all our children and bring them home. So I just want to say that for the record, that I'm committed to those calls. What I've heard in my conversations with the leadership so far is the need to transform the AFN, that it needs to be more responsive. It needs to position itself that it respects all your voices, that it has to strengthen your voice and the voice of our women and children, while at the same time respecting your sovereignty and the nationhood, the uniqueness of all our communities in our nation. So I just want to say that also, that I'm committed to that work. I know it's been done before, or the work has started. We need to keep moving forward on that work. And in order for us to advance these issues, we need to have a renewed mandate, what I call a new national mandate, that is coupled with a transformational fiscal framework, knowing that the inequities still exist in so many areas. And just one quick example, we're involved in a human rights tribunal case involving children and child welfare and the inequities that our children continue to still suffer today, and how it impacts them and how it impacts our families and communities. That's the work I'm committed to doing. And I will serve you with humility and strength. You know, I'm fair, I'm generous, but I can also be tough when a situation calls for it. So I respectfully ask for your support on July 7th. And I'll be here to answer any of your questions. And again, thank you so much for this opportunity to be with you. And I look forward to speaking with you in the days ahead, one-on-one with phone calls and hopefully other Zoom calls. So Miwach, thank you so much for being able to be with you for a bit this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Alvin Fiddler. And now we're going to go over to Kevin Hart. When you're ready, Kevin, we'll just take a little breath and then go over to Kevin Hart. And when you're ready, as soon as you start talking, I will start the timer.
I lift my hands up to my relatives, the chiefs, the cookies from the BC region. I want to acknowledge my former colleague, Regional Chief Ed.D, as well as the BCAFN executive and such. I look forward to presenting
I'm just going to interrupt.
Yeah, I hear something. There's Rochelle. There's some background noise.
Yeah. I'm just going to stop the timer there, pause it. I'm not sure where that's coming from. It might be coming from me. It might be coming from you. Is anyone else hearing the feedback from on as Kevin Hart is talking, or is it just my end?
I'm not sure.
I can hear or Maureen, if you can confirm what you're hearing on your end.
How is that now? Everybody can. Everybody.
I'm wondering if you have somebody else in your office also with Zoom on. They're going to have to mute that.
No,
much better.
There's nothing else on here.
Yeah, so we're just going to take a little breath, and I'm going to restart the timer at.
All right, take a breath and then start again, you said?
Well, we're going to try.
All right, then.
We're going to resume.
There we go. Again,
Way we go.
I want to acknowledge and thank Dr. Gwen Point for her opening comments and her prayers. I want to thank Rochelle for being our moderator here this afternoon. And again, I want to lift up and greet everyone, my relatives there in the BC region. I'm Kevin Hart. I'm the former regional chief from Manitoba for the Assembly of First Nations. I've known that I've done some great work with many of the chiefs and the cook bees there in the BC region on various portfolios. For myself, working with my colleague, Regional Chief Terry TG, we've been able to work diligently on some critical portfolios at the national level. At the national level, I've held 12 critical portfolios in the last 2 terms as the regional chief at the national level. They include housing, water, infrastructure, emergency measures, social development, which includes the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, child welfare, which includes C92. Under C92, myself working with Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafon, she can attest the 47 meetings that we did in the development of Bill C92, including making sure that we affirm for us our views as First Nations when we talk about the jurisdiction, the sovereignty, and our children. It goes to show the great lawmaking abilities that go back to the hereditary systems there within the BC region. When we look at title, an Aboriginal title, we look at the varying influences that are occurring right now. For example, under child welfare and such, we know that the federal government is still fighting our children in court. I've worked diligently with Cook B. Judy Wilson, as well as Cook B. Wayne Christian, to fight for our children at those levels. I also been able to work with former Chief Dan George on being able to achieve housing investments in the amounts of billions of dollars that have gone and has been announced in this last year's budget. There was $6 billion announced, as well as $18 billion announced overall. When we look at Jordan's principle, there's been investments of $1.05 billion under my leadership. Again, in 2021, there was another $2.5 billion announced in infrastructure money and investments for our most precious resource, I think, our children. We also look at these continued investments when we look at early learning and such too. And then on the other side, you know, in my humble experience, and I was so honored to have the portfolio for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, the National Inquiry, and as well as the final report. And that I know that previously my colleague, former regional chief Shane Gottfredson, was our portfolio holder there from the BC region before myself. I know that we worked diligently with families from all across the country to ensure that things were done in a proper manner, that we supported families from across the country in a proper manner. When we look at the implementation right now with the passing of C-15 and such, I know that there in the BC region, you've worked on an action plan. I know that for us and the rest of the our treaty nations in Canada, we've had some various concerns of the passing of C-15. I think now with it reaching royal assent, I can work with the leadership from the BC region on the implementation of that, working with our leadership from across the country, hearing from the voices of them. And of course, we always have to accept the will if you elect me as your national chief. I believe that my mandate, we want to secure a future for our women and children and our families. I want to work with your leadership to go there to learn and support and visit, because I know that relationship between the AFN and our representatives there in the BC region have been strained in recent years. I want to rebuild those connections. I feel, coming from my traditional background in that, from ceremony and language, you know, those are very important things. I also want to come and make sure that we work on things such as gaming and economic development as we come out of this pandemic. So I know that with myself as your next national chief, I'm working on a 100-day action plan. I want to thank you. That's some of my brief introductions. I want to lift my hands up to everybody and always acknowledge those 215 children that were found in Kamloops, and as well as Cookbee, Kashmir, and their relatives there in the Kamloops. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. All right. We're going to now turn to Cathy Martin to bring us home with the opening comments from our national chief candidate. So Cathy Martin, when you're ready, I will start the timer. As you see, I've been doing all along the way, and the floor is yours. Is Cathy talking and on mute, or did she have a technical issue?
Sorry.
There you go. Classic, classic. If for
Okay.
reason we needed to send you a blanket, or is it you were talking and you weren't unmuted? It's all the classic Zoom things. Yay. So when you're ready, please proceed.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank the Assembly of First Nations British Columbia for providing this opportunity to all the candidates for National Chief to present their vision and strategies. I am one such candidate. My name is Dr. Cathy Martin of the Listugush Micmac Nation. And I'd like to share my priorities for the AFN, my vision for the organization, and my strategies for implementing action. But before I begin, I'd like to offer my sincerest condolences to the families and communities of the 215 plus souls that were found and acknowledged. As a nation coast to coast, we are grieving. So for my priorities, the majority of issues we currently face as First Nations people are based on systems developed to exclude and control us by external governments and organizations. So systemic racism is the underlying cause of the majority of common issues we face as First Nation people in Canada. It includes everything from underfunded service programs in health, education, and other service delivery programs to blatantly racially motivated actions against our people by justice, security, and external governments. Addressing systemic racism is so important because we need to have our people at giving meaningful input and be at the decision-making tables with upper-level policymakers. not to negotiate what's already ours, but to increase the understanding of our inherent rights and cultural practices, and to provide meaningful input to policy and legislation within Canada and the provinces. Even more important is the conveyance of respect that we are all diverse First Nations with diverse needs, cultural practices, and rights. Systemic racism is also seen in the current legislation and modern day treaty processes. The Assembly of First Nations, through the National Chief, can bring to light the rights and inherent the rights. Sorry, I'll start that again. The National Chief can bring to light our rights as inherent title holders to our unceded lands and resources by promoting appreciation and recognition of our legal rights and history, not only with Canada, but also with the Crown, with whom many of our nations already have established historic treaties. So the current modern day treaty negotiation system being implemented is colonialistic. It denies our nations the liberty to discuss among their nations or with other First Nations who have been through similar process. This process of secrecy and exclusion is of little to no benefit for our First Nations and does not respect our values of inclusivity, responsibility, and 7th-generational planning. As well, discussions between the East and the West are beneficial when determining management of our fishing and resource rights. So my vision for the AFN stems from my value of inclusivity and from the charter that was adopted in 1985 in its original intent. The Assembly of First Nations is just that, an assembly. It is an organization designed to allow us to gather and discuss the issues that we face as First Nations while respecting the individuality and diversity of each nation. I also believe that there is no better time than now to begin forming alliances between our traditional governing systems and our elected governing systems within each nation. I think of us in relation to sweetgrass, as we are all rooted in the lands of our nations. And when we braid sweetgrass, it creates strength, both physically and spiritually. And in our communities, we are of all the same nation, in which the imposition of the elected governing system has caused a divide. But both our traditional and elected governance have legal recognition, and forming alliances will only strengthen our power as First Nations. So I think it's time to redefine and realign the Assembly of First Nations to ensure inclusivity when discussing ways to promote the political, economical, and social advancement of our individual sovereign nations. The strategic approach I'm advocating for as National Chief is based on research, intrinsic of my own personal political experiences, in combination with specific research on successful implementation of community-driven plans. In addition to being a grassroots politician, mother, and grandmother, I am an academic. And my specialty as a curriculum developer is taking an objective from here and bringing it to realization over here in a step-by-step process that entails rights holders' input, stakeholders' input, elected and traditional governance, elders, and in consideration of the surrounding communities, our urban indigenous, our resources, our environment, legislations, financial implications, and future generations. So do I have all the answers? Absolutely not.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you. Thank you so
All
very
right.
much, Kat. I know you're so
I was so
close.
close to finish.
I think that's the time. Thank you so very much, Cathy.
No problem.
Thank you to each and every one of the National Chief candidates for the opening comments. We've heard from all 7, Roseanne Archibald, Reginald Bellerose, Jody Calahoo Stonehouse, Lee Crowchild, Alvin Fiddler, Kevin Hart, and with Cathy Martin, just taking us all the way through for those opening comments. Going to now open the floor for questions. So if you could virtually raise your hand, I've asked for some help from BCAFN. We're going to list the speaking order on the side. A couple of things I want to remind you of, and that is what I had stated earlier. You can ask a question specifically to a candidate, a National Chief candidate, or you can ask a question to all of the National Chief candidates. And for any one response, it will be 2 minutes. We're just in honor of how many participants we have on the line, as well as opportunity. We're not going to do any follow-up questions until we've done a first round of questions. So I just want to make that really clear. And the last thing I want to make sure that we all do is, I think Dr. Gwen Point raised some good aspects about people standing forward in leadership. And that is that we are going to be hard on the issues and soft on the people. And I also forgot to be very clear that these questions, the floor is open to chiefs and proxies to ask questions of our national candidates, as you'll be the ones who will be voting for them. So chiefs or proxies at this time, any questions, please raise your hand and we'll take them. If you prefer to have it written in the chat, we'll alternate between chat questions as well as questions from the floor. Just be clear in the chat if it's to a candidate or if it's to all candidates. If you'd like to send it to me directly to ask the question, you can send it to Rochelle Coy, and then you see moderator. I'm up there twice because I have my cell phone on as well, but the one that I'm active on right now is Rochelle Coy, moderator. So the floor is now open for questions.
If I could ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I think here in British Columbia, we've had definitely the, I guess, positive relationship with our provincial government in implementing the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, Bill C-41. C-15, the federal act, received royal assent on Indigenous Peoples Day on June 21st. So I guess my question to all the candidates is, how are you going to implement the act, as it were, C-15, and making sure that there is inclusion from all regions and developing a national action plan, and also the development in terms of a strategy to align all the federal laws that the federal government utilizes to align with the United Nations Declaration? Because what you've talked about, each candidate talked about, is really within the United Nations Declaration, within the recognition of your sovereignty, your self-determination, of your Indigenous rights, of your treaty rights, etc. So that's my question to you. Thank you, Rochelle.
Thank you so much, Regional Chief Terry TG. So that is a question to all candidates. What we're going to do, as I stated at the beginning, and acknowledging your hand up as well, Ken Watson, I see some questions showing up in the chat as well. Like I said, we're going to alternate back and forth between the two. So we'll go to this question from Regional Chief. We're going to go all the way through alphabetical order, but just know from this point onward, the rotation is going to bump down by one each time we go, so that the advantage of starting off is ending is passed on. So we're going to do a quick 2 minutes or less for each candidate. I'm not going to repeat the question. We're going to just get you to jump right in as quick as we can to get through as many questions as possible. So we're going to start off with you, Roseanne Archibald, and I'm starting the timer now.
Okay, Miigwech, Regional Chief TG, for the question. I would really look to BCAFN's experience. You have Bill 41, and you are ahead of the rest of the country in terms of how that bill is being implemented within BC. And I certainly would look to BC to see how that process has unfolded for you. That would be one of the first things I would do with this particular region. And then examine what this region wants nationally. So for me, as you know, Chief TG, I have always taken a regional approach to things, that I've always believed that regions lead best. And in relation to all of the federal legislation that has to be brought into line with the declaration, I certainly would work with the federal government in that regard on the bigger piece. But I certainly look to regions to help us move forward in terms of an action plan. And the actual bill itself does have that process outlined. It is a 3-year process, and many First Nations have complained that that process is too long, that we need it to happen in a faster time frame. And so I would look at how do we accelerate the implementation of Bill C-215 in terms of the national picture. And so I think sorry, Marcel, I'm just trying to keep track of the time. But yeah, I think that would be my approach, is to work with the federal government on an action plan and making sure that we can accelerate it shorter than what they have actually proposed. Miigwech.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to Reginald Bellerose right now, and I'm starting the timer now.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Regional Chief. We may not all agree on C-15 across the country. We are all in agreement that the rights holders must lead the implementation strategy. That's where I want to focus, shift from the AFN to the rights holders, bring this forward. We have AFN has the responsibility and the duty to ensure that as many First Nations as possible, all if possible, are inclusive in the process. They're participating, they're engaged, they're having their input, they're having their say. I listened to the meeting in December. I understood that it was going to bring forward this we don't support, we support type of strategy, and it got tabled. What I believe is that we as First Nation people have the ability to live the way we want in our lands and our territories that's been given to us from the Creator. The Prime Minister is bragging to the world that he's fixed the First Nation problem because China has complained to the United Nations about the treatment of Indigenous peoples in Canada. The Prime Minister Trudeau went international and said he's fixed the problem. I believe we have a long ways to go, and we have to lead the process. We are the first peoples in this land. We are the leaders of this land. In my humble opinion, we are the boss. The First Nations are the boss in this land. The federal government should be asking us for permission. I'll answer that question that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to now go to Jody Calahoo Stonehouse, and I'm starting the timer now. Great.
Thank you for this question, Regional Chief TG. This is one of the contentious issues that we're facing across the country. BC, of course, is in support of this and has lifted this, and this means meaningful change with the province and in 4 First Nations. For the treaty chiefs, there's a really big concern around, as you know, the treaty is considered a covenant. Those pipes were lifted, and for our treaties, it's a sacred relationship, not only with Creator and with the Canadian state, the Crown, and there's that fear that this legislation could potentially trump treaty. And so what we're seeing at the national level is we are having actual entire tribal nations leave. Treaty 8 has removed themselves from the Assembly of First Nations. We have Alexander First Nations from Treaty 6 remove themselves. We have Poundmaker in Saskatchewan remove themselves, particularly around this issue. And where the fundamental flaw took place was that there wasn't the due diligence and consultation. The rights holders were not one-on-one talked to, and we didn't take the time to flesh out what were the concerns, was adaptation or modifications needed. And so now what we have to do is some backtracking at the national level. We need to spend some time fleshing out, what does Royal Ascension mean? How is this being implemented in this province? What could it mean in another province? How is this related to non-treaty and treaty relationships? And we have nations talking about repeal processes. And so the mandate of the national chief has to come from the chiefs in assembly. And so presenting all the information to all of our chiefs, looking at the issues, where the tensions are, and how we might move forward collectively in solidarity so that we're lifting all of our people. So this is the very big work that lies ahead for the national chief within the next year. So thank you for raising this question. It's in the chiefs in assembly and presenting all the information so we can make the best decisions possible.
Thank you so much. We're going to go immediately over to, just hold on. Once I get my timer stopped, we're going to go immediately over to Lee Crowchild. And I'm starting the timer now.
Jurisdiction and sovereignty matter. At the foundational level, we must redefine our doctrine of our own discovery. Bill C-15 It's kind of a management tool, to be quite honest, that the government can use. There was a time when I really thought that this is the best move, the best thing that could happen for Canada, and I've actually changed my thinking a little bit here, because it's coming across as a management tool, and as Jody had said, it's got the danger of replacing our treaties. Now I know BC is in certainly a different boat. Self-government is important. Self-determination is important. All of those are important items in that. And I think that goes right across Canada. And that's why I say jurisdiction and sovereignty matter. You know, UNDRIP, maybe we need to just step back a little bit from it and say we need to come up with our own First Nations form of UNDRIP. So we actually have much more say at the grassroots level about what that actually looks like. And I always say at the end of the day, regardless of what policy comes in, what rules are being said, at the end of the day, as chiefs, we all took stock of what our community is faced with at that moment. And we know so many of them go without food. A lot go without housing. You know, our women suffer from domestic violence, sexual abuse. Those are our realities. Will UNDRIP help us to get there? As it stands, maybe not as quickly as we want it to be. That's why I say there should be a bit of a step back and a review of that and come up with our own First Nations C15, if that's what we want to call it there. That's what I would say right now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to go over to Alvin Fiddler, and I'm starting the timer now.
Yeah, good afternoon, Regional Chief. Good to see you. Hopefully we can meet up again soon in person. It's been a while since all of us got together. But thank you for your question. I just want to start off by acknowledging those that worked so hard to create this legislation to where we are today. Former Chief, Grand Chief Wilton Littlechild, former MP Romy Saganash, and so many others that worked so hard, that made their life's mission to get to where we are. And I know it's not perfect. I acknowledge that it's not everyone that can rally around, but it's a possible tool in our toolbox that you can add to advance your issues. So I acknowledge BC's support with this bill and others across the country. I think in order for us to make sure that this works in a way that we sort of envision it, is to create a truly collaborative process, to create a table, an implementation table, and that's something we've done here at NAN on some of the provincial legislation on policing, for example, where we create regulations, because every piece of legislation needs to have regulations that will support it. So I think we need to make sure that all our regions are represented at that table to help create the regulations that will support this in a way that we all envision it, and it has to be a truly collaborative process. That's the only way that's going to work. So maybe that's for the question. I look forward to being involved in this work in the days and weeks and months ahead. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We're going to take that same question to Kevin Hart, and I'm starting the timer now.
Thank you very much for the question, and it's a very important question. I think that affects all the First Nations across the country from coast to coast to coast. For myself, if elected as your national chief, what I'm going to do is look for a commitment from the Prime Minister to do with policy, law, and legislative review. I think that's part of the work that was done in terms of, like, say, if we go back to, I believe there was a resolution passed in 2019 by Cookby Ignace as well as Cookby Christian that talked about this very implementation of C15, then C92 and such, that talked about the very articles and such and how we're going to incorporate them when we talk about our rights. There in BC, of course, we talk about Aboriginal title in that. In the other territories and such, we have treaty rights holders who were very vocal during the process of it being, how would you say it? It wasn't long enough. There wasn't time to make the legislation stronger according to some of the rights holders and that. For myself, if elected as a national chief, I'm going to work with our chiefs from the BC region. I know with the work that you've done collectively now on your action plan, we have to bring a bigger action plan forward now instead of having the government come forward and give us their action plan to implement C15. I know with the wealth of knowledge and the work that you've done in the BC region, when we talk about, for example, the proper title and rights holders, I know that there's a Métis issue occurring right now in the encroachment of treaty and title rights holders there in the BC region that needs to be addressed. My action process will set a process working with Regional Chief DG as well as your leadership.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Right.
Kevin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rochelle.
Kevin, yeah, thank you. It's a tight 2 minutes. So we're going to go right over to you, Cathy Martin, and I'm starting the timer as soon as I see you.
See me yet? Okay. Hi, Chief TG. It's you've
I hear you.
raised.
That's good. I just start the timer now because I can hear you.
Okay. All right. You raised a good issue here of what would be the plan in place to implement the national action plan in relation to the C15 bill. And what I've mentioned before is that these action plans and these resolutions, when we look at like the Truth and Reconciliation, we look at missing and murdered Indigenous women, the well-intended calls to action are put in place. But what this country struggles with is the implementation of these calls to action. And so you're right to have concern that the similar lack of action will occur with the C15. So also, as a national leader, what I have in my platform, I talk a lot about my specialty as a curriculum developer, and what does curriculum development have to do with politics? It has to do an awful lot. And I think all my co-candidates for national chief will agree that the information for determining a national action plan has to stem from the grassroots. It has to stem from the chiefs. And so my specialty is creating frameworks that is very respectful of the diverse nations within this country, the diverse perspectives of the chiefs. So my take on it would be to establish such a framework to get the information from the grassroots and identify best practices, and that parallel to establishing an ongoing relationship with the federal government in order to track progress. So this would be my take. It's starting from a framework that can be adapted to each individual community.
Thank you so much, Cathy. Perfect. So as speaking order of what I've noted, I know from the floor we have Chief Councillor Ken Watts, and we have some questions in the chat. Marie Baptiste, Councillor Marie Baptiste, on behalf of Tecumseh to Secwepemc. We have Chief Donna Aljam, pardon me on your pronunciation, and then Chief Councillor Marilyn Slett in the chat. Then if we have time, we'll go to the second question from Tecumseh. But first over to Chief Councillor Ken Watts.
Chu Uklama Wabish Hikamamuk, elected Chief Councillor for Sishot First Nation. I want to thank all the candidates today. I'd like to thank the BCAFN for organizing today, and I'd like to thank our amazing elder for always starting us off in a good way with good energy, especially when we need it at days and times I think like this, where there's a lot of hurt in our communities lately. So I just want to share a bit of background, and then I have a question at the end. Is, in British Columbia, I think we've seen the highs and lows of the AFN. We've felt the disrespect for our former regional chief, Jody Wilson-Raybould, on the floor of the AFN Assembly, a moment I'll never forget, but also the positives. When we were in the Yukon and Whitehorse, when chiefs and leaders across the country stood up and stood in solidarity when we found out experiments happened against our children in residential schools. I was moved that I'll never forget that moment. And quite frankly, I noticed that we stand in solidarity when we focus on our children. Some of the other issues, we end up creating division. And so, you know, in my previous roles as a youth rep and at our tribal council and counselor, and even as a consultant, I've seen the AFN and the National Chief's Office play a great role in supporting and advocating with First Nations and securing meetings with ministers, deputies, etc. But I've also witnessed the lack of mandate sometimes. And on behalf of CISHA, I also want to share a concern that I hear about the Confederacy of Nations and the charter. A portion of the charter that I think is flawed, one representative per region per 10,000 citizens, which doesn't reflect the UNDRIP at all. It doesn't reflect nation-based decision-making, in my opinion. So it's a portion of the charter that I recommend needs to be reviewed and amended, and because I think it goes against UNDRIP and it's based on population-based instead of nation-based. And when we have 203 First Nations in British Columbia, I think their voices need to be respected. So my question is, how will we ensure that all First Nations and regions are respected and strategies or plans are developed to provide AFN and the AFN National Chief with the appropriate mandate and direction? I could copy and paste it into the chat too. Clicko on behalf of CISHA.
That'd be great. So the speaking order will be, like I said, it's going to be rotating. And so we're going to start off with Reginald Bellerose, followed by Jody Calahoo Stonehouse, Lee Crowchild, Alvin Fiddler, Kevin Hart, Cathy Martin, and wrapping up with Roseanne Archibald. So, and as you've heard, I'm just going to call the person up and start the timer. So Reginald Bellerose, your time is now.
Thank you, Chief Counselor. Important question. And one of the areas that I want to ensure that all First Nations are respected at the Assembly of First Nations. I want to focus on a common agenda with a united vision. And through that common agenda, I believe there's lands, there's peoples, and there's histories. We all have lands. Some need more, some haven't got lands. We all have peoples. We all have children, we all have elders, and we all have history. Histories, our stories need to be told. I've been promoting 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the afternoon for nations to come in and share their stories to the chiefs of Canada, to the people of Canada. We assume we know what each nation's been through, what our histories are, when in reality, we don't know that much. For me, I'd love to sit there and listen to these stories come forward for all of us to hear. The songs, bring your drum, bring your dance, bring your youth, come and share that time. So if we did 30 minutes for one nation in the morning, 30 for the second, do that in the afternoon, that's 4 nations a day can come and share their stories. And I believe we could start to connect more effectively and have greater respect for each other. What I've been promoting for authorities, I've been big on working with proper authorities through my time, whether it's a people's vote or regionally in Saskatchewan. We've been asking for council resolutions to come in on gaming, on policing. That way the regional chief in Saskatchewan has properly mandated from the First Nations that he represents. This is Bobby Cameron. So this is what I would bring forward, resolutions from council to show that there is support for the direction that the AFN is heading. Thank you, Chief Counselor.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go straight over to Jody Calahoo Stonehouse, and I'm starting the timer now.
Great. Haichka, thank you for this question, Chief Ken. So this is a question also that the Prairie Chiefs want to know around. How are we going to deal with equity? Why does BC have so many of the votes? So we need to have the discussion and flesh out, what does equity mean to us? And I agree, the charter needs some serious love and intensive thought and deliberation amongst the chiefs in assembly. We must decentralize the authority. How are we including our women, our elders, and our men in the authoritative positions to help direct and guide the decisions that are made? And so I don't have the answer around how do we ensure that a particular voice is lifted, but what I do have is a process, and that means coming together, fleshing out some governance models, the chiefs in assembly, looking at some potential and possibilities, and we have to discuss why a particular region has so many votes, why it's believed nations should have this amount of authority, and come together to make that decision. And it's going to take some investment in time and energy and ceremony. We have to sit together in ceremony to flesh out these ideas so that we can make these changes in governance, so that institutional memory can be passed on to the next generations, so that our grandchildren can step right into our footsteps and know how to make this machine work. So your question's a good one, and the answer is about following the mandate of the chiefs in assembly, but at the national level, being able to bring forward some concepts, some ideas for us to flush through how we might make some real deep systemic change. Hi, Nanaskaman.
Thank you very much. We're going to go immediately over to Lee Crowchild, and I'm starting the timer now. Lee Crowchild, I think you're maybe on mute.
Gosh, I was just spilling out my guts there too.
Lee Crowchild?
Yep, can you hear me now? Yes?
I'm sorry. Okay, I'm gonna restart. Go ahead.
Okay, like I was saying, I was just spilling out my whole life story right there. But anyways, what I want to say is that, you know, First Nations laws are kind of our deepest expression of our culture and our values. You know, and if we use that as our kind of our guiding principle as we move forward here, you're going to be able to respect each other's diversity. The other candidates have talked about what the challenges are. We have to respect our diversity. This is one of the biggest things I learned when I lived in BC, is the respect for laws, the respect for culture. You know, and then it goes through all of BC. And I've been through a lot of places in BC and visited with ceremonies and with practices and that. So yes, that's going to be how we ensure that's being respected. What you see is what you're going to get. And when I don't know the answer, I'm going to say, I don't know, but I bet you someone in your community might be able to help us do that. That's how we begin to respect our cultures, our values, and how we move forward here. Because when I was a sitting chief, you know, there was a lot of things I didn't know. The humbleness comes in admitting, say, I don't know. Then it's okay to say that. You know, but we get cast in this position where we're supposed to be the know-alls. Well, I don't know everything. I don't know what a woman feels, but I have to learn how to respect and listen to what a woman feels. And especially with the emergence of women chiefs more and more, their voice is getting much, much louder. I see a little hand there. I got 21 seconds left. So yeah, that's about what I can say to that. We need to support our women leaders. We need to support our women chiefs. And we need to step back and come back in a balanced approach in leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to now go to Alvin Fiddler. Alvin, when I see you, I'm going to start the timer when I hear you.
All right. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chief Councillor Ken Watts. Good to see you again. Thank you for your question. I think it's something I've learned in the 6 years I've had the honor of being the Grand Chief at the Schneider-Basque Nation. Is we have 49 chiefs, we have 7 tribal councils, and everyone, you know, even within that tribal grouping, they're diverse, and to be able to work with everyone with respect and a good way is something I've learned at NAN, and that's something that I'm sure I will take with me to the national level. How important it is for a leader, any leader, to be able to have that respectful dialogue with the leadership, to hear them first of all, and to figure out ways on how we can collaborate on these issues. And I know some of the work has been done at the AFN in the past to look at how we can transform the AFN so that it is truly an organization that we all want and need, and it's going to meet and support you in your role as leaders in your own nations. So that's something I'm committed to revisiting, at least to look at what's been done to date, and more importantly, what we need to do to move it forward so that it becomes a national organization that's going to serve your needs. And that's something I'm committed to doing, and reaching out to leaders like yourself. I'm looking at Rossell here too with her big clock. I think it's okay. So I'm committed to that work, Ken. So thank you so much for your question. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Alvin. Sorry, I didn't want to hide it on you. I'm trying not to hold it up all the time, so I have it balanced on my coffee cup. So we're going to go now to Kevin Hart, and when I hear you, Kevin, I'm going to start the clock.
Thank you, Rochelle. I want to thank Chief Counselor for the question. It's a very good one indeed. You know, when we look at the advancement of the AFN and its relationship with First Nations, you know, I want to make sure that first we take stock of what we've been able to do and accomplish working together, as well as, you know, to profile for us as First Nations across this country, our shared experiences and lessons that we've learned. I think that there's innovative practices in advancing our First Nations jurisdiction when it comes to this, especially when we talk about charter renewal and being able to have the voice for First Nations. I think that going back to those grassroots, when we talk about those grassroots movements, those grassroots governance systems and such, we've never lost those systems. Our elders have said that, you know, we still have our languages, we still have our drums and such. I believe that we need to exchange ideas on the elements of a broad national working plan that's going to help us advance First Nation governance as well as nation building. And I think that's very important when we talk about the AFN as an organization and the structure of the AFN moving forward. I think we could develop and foster dialogue together, working with myself as your national chief to reach those tangible action items to transform the current relationship and support capacity for First Nation governments and their economies moving forward. So thank you for that question.
Thank you very much, Kevin Hart. We're going to go to you, Cathy Martin, and as soon as we hear you, we're going to start the timer.
Okay, thank you, Chief Counselor Ken Watts, for your question. And I interpret your question as, how are you ensuring that each First Nation is represented in the Charter? Well, as I spoke earlier, I talked about the need to have the Charter redefined and realigned in order that it fits the needs of our First Nation communities. So how do we go about to do that? Well, we need to examine the Charter when it began in 1985, and we need to look at all the changes and all the progresses and processes that it went through to date, and how the mandates changed or if they changed. More importantly, we have to look at the feelings of the chiefs, the wills of the chief. What is it that is not appropriate in the Charter? So again, speaking to this, not to sound like a broken record, but I'm going to talk about frameworking and the importance of frameworking, which has the ability to have, I have the ability to create a framework that targets individual, diverse First Nations and to get the input on a specific issue and to collaborate later on that issue. And the frameworks that I've developed are based on our value systems, our holistic value systems. And when we look at the Charter and we look at the holistic value systems that we tend to have, they're based on inclusivity, and they're also based on everyone getting what they need, not necessarily equality. It's not so much as number based, but in our cultures, we provided for those in need, so every nation would get what they need. So when redefining the Charter, this can be looked at as well. What value system is underlying this, and how are we going to incorporate that into the Charter? And most importantly, the direction does come from the chiefs, not from the national leader. The national leader just facilitates. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And we're going to wrap up this question with Roseanne Archibald. And as soon as I hear you, Roseanne, we're going to start the timer.
Okay, miigwech. Thank you, Chief Counselor Ken Watts. I did answer, I saw you the other day and answered part of this question in the chat. I am a big believer in strategic planning. And in fact, I have been, and Regional Chief Terry Teegee will attest to this, that I have always been pushing for a retreat for the executive to do a proper strategic plan together a 3-year plan. And that's what I'm going to do when elected as national chief. One of the first things I'm going to do is get the full executive together and do a proper strategic planning process and present that to the chiefs in December. So elected in July, the December meeting is an opportunity for the chiefs to see what the AFN executive have come forward with. And each of those regional chiefs really knows their community. So they're going to bring forward the ideas and priorities of their regions, and that will be reflected in a strategic plan that will build the mandate for the remainder of the term, and certainly provide clarity around the mandate for the national chief. On the question of representation, I come from a small community. Our community is about 500 people, and we have a voice. And I believe that every community has to have a voice in the process. And it's really important for us to understand where we put that. And not so much in the corporate setting, because AFN is a corporation. And so we need a proper board to run that corporation. But we do need a political process. And for me, the first thing I'm going to do is bring forward a revitalized Confederacy of Nations, restructure it so that it is fairly represented by all people across Canada. And I would do that through the Chiefs Committee on Charter Renewal. They need to step up their work. They've been focusing on the corporation and restructuring the corporation. It's now time to start focusing on the political restructuring that has to happen.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, Roseanne. Thank you. So that takes us through to couple of questions. I'm going to go into the first one from the chat, and on behalf of the Kamloops Secwépemc Councillor Marie Baptiste asked, what are the candidates' environmental priorities? Rights to clean air, clean water. So the order is Jody Calahoo Stonehouse will be first, followed by Lee Crowchild, Alvin Fiddler, Ken Hart, Cathy Martin, Roseanne Archibald, and wrapping up with Reginald Bellerose. And we're going to go immediately to Jody Calahoo Stonehouse, and as soon as I hear you, I'm going to start the timer.
All right, Haichka, thank you, Councillor Marie Baptiste. This is, of course, fundamental to all of the First Peoples across Turtle Island. You know, in BC, it's the salmon. In the north, it's the caribou. In my territory, it's the depletion of beavers. And so across the landscape, we are seeing, because of climate change, resource extraction, contamination, we are seeing multiple adverse effects on our animal relatives. And so what I believe needs to happen at the national level is we need to take a look at all of the resolutions that we have made in regards to climate change, environment protection, species protection, and look again at what has been done, next steps, what are their results, were things successful? And if things that were successful, let's build on those, let's scale those across the country. But what we really need to do is bring together our knowledge keepers, our traditional ecological knowledge, along with our prophecies. We need our scientists, our best scientists who've been studying water, who have been studying the species depletion, who've been studying climate change. And we have to bring that Western knowledge and our Indigenous knowledge together. So that way, when we come together, because the water, the air, the land, they are all connected. Just as we live on that land and we benefit from it, we are all connected. So our plan must be integrative of all of the elements. And so bringing the traditional knowledge, the Western knowledge, our prophecies, and the scientific theory, so we can make real strategic plans around how we're going to implement and support nations in the protection of their harvesting rights, in the protection of their livelihoods, and in the protection of those species. We have much work to do in this department. So thank you for raising the issue. And it's for the betterment of all of us. We have to work together. Thank you, Haichka.
Thank you so much. We're going to go right over to Lee Crowchild. As soon as I hear you speaking, I'm going to start the timer.
Well, we all talked about the Confederacy of Nations, but within that, we need to kind of look at our infrastructure. What does that infrastructure look like? Because jurisdiction matters. The nations all call the shots. Institutions matter. There has to be capable institutions of governance, stable roles, fair and independent mechanisms for dispute resolution, and the separation of business from politics. Culture matters. This is really big here. Legitimate, culturally grounded institutions of governance. Economic systems, policies, and procedures. Strategic thinking matters. Decisions are made with long-term priorities in mind. Leadership matters. Instead of politics as a boxing ring where factions fight to control all the goodies. So these are your foundational principles that we all have to talk about and we have to address in order to answer the questions that are being asked here. We need to work at our foundational principles in that. And that's infrastructure. I come from a public works background. Your nation cannot survive without a sound infrastructure. AFN cannot survive much longer without a sound foundational infrastructure. And this is where the chiefs matter. This is where their leadership matters. This is where their knowledge of culture matters. And you know, there's a lot of chiefs that are very good strategic thinkers, and that matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lee Crowchild, we're going to now go to Alvin Fiddler. And when I hear you speaking, I'm going to start the timer.
Miigwech for the important question. Something that my mom and dad and other elders in my communities have taught me is that our land, our waters are sacred, and therefore we have a sacred responsibility as well as leaders, as a people, to look after our lands and our waters for future, for my own kids and those that will come after us. And that's something that I always think about, especially when I fly over our territory and see just how beautiful our lands are in our territories. And there is no question that we are seeing significant changes on our lands. You know, our lakes are losing oxygen. It's having an impact on how animals migrate. And this whole climate change, again, it's having more of an impact on our people. And so it is so important that we have, that we build capacity at the community level for them to be able to adapt to a changing climate. You know, while we are protecting our lands, our waters, there are also opportunities. I think we need to be mindful of what those are and how we can maximize those as well. And just utilizing our knowledge keepers, our elders. We know we have tremendous resource at the community level, and just utilizing those at the same time utilizing the scientific research that's already been done. Like in Saskatchewan with our lakes and how their lakes are losing oxygen and how that's impacting fish. There's so much that work that we need to do, but to me, the key is making sure our communities have the capacity to be able to do this work and to be able to adapt in a good way so that our communities are sustainable moving forward.
Thank you so much. We're now going to go over to Kevin Hart. As soon as I hear you speaking, Kevin, I'll start the timer.
Thank you, Rochelle. I think that climate change and the environment has always been something near and dear to my heart ever since a young child, being part of that grassroots movement and such. My family, we've been water protectors, we've been land protectors ever since I could remember. I remember, for example, when we talk about education, being arrested at 12 years old, fighting for First Nation education because of the cuts done. Same thing in my work when we talk about the environment and my position. I was sent to Standing Rock on behalf of the Assembly of First Nations, as well as Treaties 1 to 11 to be their international observer there. I've also walked with Grand Chief Stuart Phillip when we marched up Burnaby Mountain to support our relatives there when we talk about the protection of our lands and waters. You know, my heart's prayers go out to our land protectors and such up in northern BC, because I know it was such a contentious issue. And I fully supported my colleague, Regional Chief TG at the time, and our relatives in the fight for clean water and to defend the land in that. I presented at the UN Climate Summit in Marrakesh, Morocco in 2016 to save the Indigenous Climate Accord, working with Elder Francois Paulette from the NWT. So my work when we talk about the position in the environment and going forward, again, it comes at the direction of you, the grassroots people, and you as the leaders. You know, I've been before when we talk about the environmental and regulatory reviews and such, but I just want to say that we have to fight for our people. First Nations people have contributed the least to climate change, and yet we feel the full effects of climate change. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. We're going to go now to Cathy Martin, and then Cathy, as soon as I hear you speaking, I start the timer.
Okay, thank you. So for my environmental priorities, well, first of all, I feel that as First Nations, we are always been connected to our environment. We are one with our environment. So absolutely environmental priorities are on the radar. To ensure clean air and water and the effects of climate change, pollution, industry, we have to look at what impacts the industry is having on our environment. And we look at that, we have to look at it legally, because that's the only way we're going to get results. As much as we hate to do it, our relationship with Canada and the provinces who issue these permits to industry to, you know, either take resources from our lands or have industry to pollute our lands, they have a responsibility, you know, to make sure that our environment is sustainable for us. And so if they've not fulfilled that responsibility, then we have to look at them legally about the impacts on our people, the loss of access to our resources, the impact on our health and the future health of our generations, as well as the impedance of our own cultural practices. So all those have to be considered in a legal relationship, a legal you know, suit, if you will. And I look to the East for some best practices that have happened with this. And I'm thinking of an issue that had happened in the East in Nova Scotia with Chief Andrea Paul's reserve in Pictou Landing. And there was a whole documentary called There's Something in the Water, and the effects of pollution and how that community dealt with that legally and also spiritually, and connected back to having clean water and clean environment. So this is the route that I would take with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to now go to Roseanne Archibald as soon as I hear you, Roseanne. So not quite yet, Reginald, but Roseanne Archibald.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the question from Marie. What are my environmental priorities? I have held the water portfolio for the last 3 years at the AFN. And so clean drinking water and clean water is an absolute priority for me. And it's the basis of life. If we don't have clean water, then we just will not be able to survive at all. And so that's one of my #1 priorities. In terms of the degradation of land and climate change, obviously sorry, my my landline is ringing. Obviously, all of these environmental issues are at the forefront of my mind as a candidate for national chief. And one thing I want to tell you is my own experience as a chief has been to figure out how to do development of our resources for the benefit of our people, while also respecting the land and environment. And one area that I was able to do that as my own community was in forestry. So we do have forestry agreements, but we also protected 200,000 acres of sacred land to our people. So there is a way to balance these two things, but certainly water is my priority, and ensuring that the land is kept in pristine, a manner that will be available for the generations to come. That's my priority. I'm not just thinking about today, I'm thinking about all those children in the future and making sure they have what they need to survive on this planet and to have a good life. Miigwech.
Thank you very much, Roseanne Archibald. Now we're going to go to Reginald Bellerose. As soon as I hear you speaking, Reginald, I will start the timer.
Yeah, thank you. This is one of the very critical areas that we need to focus on. I believe we need to put clear value on our elders and knowledge keepers as the experts of our lands, our waters, and our air. We have to bring in resources to support that capacity. Science in our areas need to take a back seat to our traditional knowledge and our traditional experts. If you look at the targets around the country, a lot of the targets for pollution and development is around First Nations in our territories and our lands, and that racism needs to stop. The larger populated areas are not targeted, so that's one of the areas we got to address and stop, and ensure that the youth is being made aware from the elders on how the waters flow, how our creation stories come to be, and why we are here. So those are some of the areas that I want to focus on in climate, and it's a very important area right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reginald Bellerose. That takes us through 3 questions to all candidates. And just looking at the time, what I'm going to suggest is there's a number of questions in the chat. And just to remind you, and there's one that is in direct message to me that I will pull out the essence of that and put it in the chat. What I'm going to suggest to all candidates is you can literally have the option to save the chat so you can do follow-ups, those questions. I do see Chief Lee Spahan with his hand up. So what I'm going to invite Chief Lee Spahan to do, sorry, I'm holding the timer up. Chief Lee Spahan to do is ask your question, knowing that we don't have time to answer it today, but at least you can provide the background question, ask the question, and then we can invite candidates to follow up if they so wish. So with that, I'm going to turn over to you, Chief Lee Spahan.
Hello and good morning, everyone. Lee Spahan, Chief of the Cowater Band. 2 questions for the candidates in regards to water quality and the protection of watersheds. How would you as the National Chief be advocating for us First Nations for the water quality objectives such as the protection of watersheds? Second question is around salmon issues and the salmon crisis here in BC. How would you as a National Chief advocate for all of us First Nations that rely on wild salmon here in British Columbia? And I only ask that because we very rarely see the DFO minister come to BC. So 2 very quick questions. Thank you very much, and thank you for being here, and appreciate your answers. Kukstam.
Kukshtacham, Cookby Lee Spahan, if you feel so inclined, if you want to put those in the chat as well, but hopefully people made note of it. I'm going to go over the questions that we have. And there's also some communities have listed how to get in touch with them as well. I know that the various candidates have listed in chat how to get a hold of them, both their email as well as their cell numbers. I also know that BC Assembly of First Nations will be providing, gathering up the pamphlets, etc., from the National Chief candidates and sharing it to all members of the BCAFN. So just some of the questions that we have not heard from yet. Just scrolling back, pardon me. So from Chief Donna Aljan from the Nickelman Band is, for all the candidates, how do you see us moving forward from today's news and DRIPA for the next generation? Again, that question is in the chat. You can save chat. Another question from Takamus Tishwetmuk through Councillor Marie Baptiste. What legislation do you see being implemented to ensure mining disasters are cleaned up by the companies doing the mining? For example, the Mount Polly disaster, or Mount Polly in BC disaster. Another question about salmon from Chief Councillor Marilyn Slett of the Heiltsuk Nation. Question to all the candidates: BC is facing a wild salmon crisis. What are your views and how will you support coastal communities who rely on salmon as we're deeply connected to wild salmon? Well, it's not just the coastal communities. You just heard from an interior community of Coldwater First Nation with with Cookbee Lise Bahan. The question that you've already answered from Chief Councillor Ken Watts is there as well. Another question from Tecumseh Teshwetma. Tecumseh Teshwetma has laws and bylaws dealing with cannabis jurisdiction by a First Nation overlands. Do you support First Nations jurisdiction over the sale and production of cannabis? And what steps would you take to ensure appropriate and federal and provincial legislation is put in place? And then there is a follow-up email from Tecumseh Teshwetma for those answers. A person that has direct messaged me, I'm going to just read the core of the question from a person who's practitioner with the Ministry of Children and Family Development in Surrey, wondering how the candidates will be working to implement change in the best interests of Indigenous children. As an Indigenous person working within a child welfare system, it is difficult for roots workers to do our work well under the restraints of the policy and legislation of MCFD. Roots practitioners provide cultural safety, Indigenous knowledge, connection to family, nations, and culture. To this work, nation support is imperative to make changes within MCFD. What will these leaders do to help children and family services and helping nations gain jurisdiction over their children? So I will take that question that was DM'd to me and put that into the chat, just the core of it. And see what else we have. And then we have a question, what do candidates propose to do on the MMIWG 2S Plus National Action Plan and Federal Pathway? Many resorted to doing their own action plans as it is not adequate. And now I'm going to just post that one question that you do not have so that you have it. And posted. And so if you look, when you see in the chat, you'll see the little icon for file and then the dot, 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 and the dot, dot, dot is to save the chat. So that's how you can grab those questions that are there. So I want to thank each and every one of the National Chief candidates for joining us today, taking time out of your very busy lives. And I personally, I thank you so much for stepping up. It's been my honor to serve you and the chiefs here from the BC Assembly of First Nations. And with that, I am honored and delighted to go back over to Gwen Point, Dr. Gwen Point, to close us in a good way.